to be more costly than was viable given the commercialization opportunity. I think there has been a hope in many of those projects, particularly the Georgia DOT and then to some degree the North Carolina DOT, that the commercialization opportunity and the revenue opportunity would be so considerable as to effectively eliminate or better the costs to the public sponsor of building the network in the first place, so that the cost of the concession, what the public sponsor would pay the concessionaire on an ongoing basis for design, build, finance, operations, and maintenance, would be offset entirely by the revenues. And that is what has simply not materialized. And a case study for that is the Kentucky Wired Network. And I don't know if you all have heard buzz about Kentucky Wired. There's been lots of both positive and negative coverage in a lot of the trade press about it. I will say only that it's the largest concessionaire style broadband project ever to close in the United States. I think it's at 5 years at this point. And the entirety of the network on a statewide basis has been constructed. And it's very much the business model that I just described of design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. And with all of that execution through a concessionaire contract to a consortium of companies led by Macquarie Capital, the large Australian investment company that's making very substantial acquisitions of communications assets in the United States right now. And the hope behind this network was that it would substantially, although not entirely, pay for itself through avoided costs, that the spending that had been the norm for public entities throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky, once redirected away from ongoing lease fees, would then serve to support operations of this network and the payments to the concessionaire, Macquarie Capital. And that spending was really considerable, and a substantial amount of the cost is covered that way, but not all of it. The commercialization piece is just being undertaken now. And in the meantime, and we'll see how the commercialization goes, but in the meantime, there is a shortfall. That model, by the way, is largely tested and is working quite well. And the economic development, open access, middle mile fiber piece of this, which was to bring middle mile fiber capacity into rural parts of Kentucky where there was, and urban parts, but just creating new opportunity throughout Kentucky for private sector providers to access bandwidth so that they could then deploy in the last mile, reaching homes and businesses and institutions. That is working quite well as well. For a network that really has just been built in the last few years, there are a substantial handful of very exciting small projects. For example, in old coal towns in eastern Kentucky that have been declining for decades, and where now there has been new investment to build fixed wireless or fiber to the premises to create some new economic activity in these communities. All of that made possible by the fact that Kentucky Wired comes into town and provides for the purchase of very cheap bandwidth, commodity bandwidth, at the prices that one could get in Louisville, but one certainly can't get it in the rural parts of Kentucky. All of that is working, so the vision of using this middle mile infrastructure for community purposes is working quite well. The big stumbling block and the challenges they have had have actually been with the execution. Costs have been much higher than were anticipated because of challenges around pole access and pole attachment in particular, and because of delays based on my experience, in part due to changes in political party between governors, and so some slowdowns in review and support for the concessionaire as they went through the process. Political change creates its own set of risks around these kinds of projects. But generally, I would say that in the long run, this will be seen as a successful project, although not necessarily a cheap project, and it is not paying for itself. It costs more than was anticipated, and it has not paid for itself. I think there are some important lessons learned about how to contain those costs and how to try to mitigate against risks before construction happens through a competitive procurement process that locks down construction costs. And that's some of what did not happen here. But you should know about this model because you will likely there could be considerable interest from entities interested in being a concessionaire through this project, but also there may be unsolicited proposals along these lines. There's a very substantial number of entities out there looking for projects like this. It's just that making the model work in a broadband context is still somewhat challenging. So that's a second model I wanted you to know of and think through. And I will let Scott correct me if I have this wrong, since he was there on the ground in Pennsylvania when this was happening. But a variation on this is what the Pennsylvania Turnpike Authority first tested before they then went to what I called the private fiber commercialization model, which is to say they designed and built their fiber and then commercialized the excess capacity.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We actually used Kentucky Wired and the mistakes they made in the early days as our sort of roadmap on how to avoid those mistakes as we move forward on our first draft. I think our first approach could have worked. I left before we finished. I think it could have, but there is no doubt that there are a lot of. It is a very complicated model and takes vision and consistency to make it happen properly. The concessionaire model, the operate, maintain, and commercialize approach is a much safer bet. And we evaluated both, went for the big hit, and then backed off to the easier one.
Thank you for that. And I have to say, someday over a cup of coffee, I would really love to hear more, because public-private collaboration in broadband is pretty much my favorite topic. And the story of the Pennsylvania initiative and the fact that it has ended so successfully, I think, is a really interesting and important story that other public entities are going to learn from for a long time to come. So if I may, I'll move on to a third model that I think should be at a minimum considered, and that I know you all have probably heard about and thought about quite a lot, which is, what if you were to, after your network is built and serving the internal needs of the 5 cities, then lease dark fiber. And the greatest attraction of the dark fiber leasing model is always that it is relatively straightforward and very low cost in most ways. And that is very much true if you were to undertake this here. What it would involve is simply building an internal structure that would allow for development of, and by the way, I'm using the term lease not in a legal sense, but in a business sense, because I know you all know that we can't opine on what the right mechanism would be under Virginia law. So I'm speaking really to leases only as the business relationship where a term of use of the fiber would be available to users of that fiber who meet the qualification criteria that you establish for that. can't speak to what the actual legal structure would be, but the dark fiber leasing would mean just an internal structure within your existing operations for entering into contracts, that is leases, and then overseeing and managing those contracts. And that is a relatively tested model, although not necessarily an incredibly lucrative model. I'll come back to that in a minute, but it is quite simple. And the added costs are really negligible. It's just the effort I just described for entering into those leases. There's no additional meaningful maintenance cost because you will be maintaining the fiber in any event for your own purposes and for your own needs. And given that the 5 cities will be using the fiber, you will presumably be maintaining it at a very robust level that would be quite attractive to potential dark fiber lessees. There is a question about additional capital cost, but it could be minimal as well. The only reason you would have additional capital cost is if you needed to or wanted to extend the fiber to get to a particular customer. But if the rings that are currently part of the plan and the design are the entirety of what would be leased, then just so long as the breakout points are where they need to be for your customers to be able to access the fiber, you really wouldn't be doing a whole lot more in leasing out dark fiber than you are currently doing. And Matt shared with you a little while ago some of the numbers that we have seen in dark fiber leases around the country. We will analyze this in more detail for you, but dark fiber leases can be as brief as just for supporting short-term tests or short-term efforts over a matter of weeks or months, or they could be many years, few years to many years. And it's not at all uncommon to see 20-year dark fiber leases. So there's a wide range of different ways that this could happen. I want to be honest about the fact that the revenue potential of dark fiber leasing is there, but it is not massive. It is not considerable. First of all, dark fiber leasing is something that is feasible only for a modest number of potential customers, your lessees. Small entities do not have the sophistication to make use of dark fiber, even if they have access to it. It can be a costly and a technically complex matter to use dark fiber. And as a result, you probably won't have smaller anchor institutions, for example. I'm working on a project in a northern city where there was consideration of making dark fiber available to churches that support community needs, to small museums, and so on. And that was, in the end, rejected because those are entities who really can't benefit from it. The entities that are likely to use dark fiber are more sophisticated ISPs, for the most part. Wireless ISPs in particular is where a big part of the business opportunity might be. But still, we are not talking about enormous revenue opportunity in that sense. Your customers would be numbered in, at best, the dozens, not the hundreds. And when I say at best, I mean, probably closer to a single dozen than many dozens. The other reason why revenue opportunities can be really modest is that leasing dark fiber to other entities gives them an enormous business opportunity to light up that fiber and use the capacity of that dark fiber to then immediately start competing with you. And competition is a good thing. I don't mean to suggest that it wouldn't be good to have someone using dark fiber they lease from you to offer services to lots of other entities, but it does limit your revenue opportunity because your first dark fiber customer becomes your competitor. And it may be that for your second potential dark fiber customer, they look at your competitor who is now leasing wavelengths or other kinds of lit services over that fiber, and they choose to go with that option rather than leasing dark fiber from you. So dark fiber leasing is a marvelous way to impact the competitive market and create opportunity for ISPs in particular, of all different sizes, other than the very small ones who aren't sophisticated enough to use dark fiber. But it's while it has these great benefits with regard to competition and ISP opportunity, it doesn't necessarily have enormous potential revenue opportunity. I would make the revenue opportunity assumption more like low to modest. Now, dark fiber leasing examples, there are so many, and I thought about which ones to share and what the it's kind of an embarrassment of riches in some ways in terms of sharing which would be most attractive. But I decided to show you what this looks like at its absolute best and most exciting. And that is the lease of dark fiber, as well as conduit and other real estate assets by the city of Lincoln, Nebraska. And what the city there has done is through the availability of pretty considerable assets, but not necessarily a whole lot more substantial than you will have once this project is completed. The city has attracted a private partner that is leasing those assets and paying for access to those assets. And the payments are relatively modest, but the city's goals around broadband are being fulfilled in remarkable ways, quite dramatically. The company made an absolute commitment as part of the partnership in which it leases these assets that it will build fiber to the premises everywhere throughout Lincoln, which is a pretty exciting proposition, bringing much more robust residential and small business competition to the broadband market than exists in most places in the United States. And the other piece that I think was really interesting about this is that the company and the city, and I'm not necessarily recommending this for your project, but I just raise it as an interesting creative piece that came out of their negotiation. The company and the city agreed that if the city would return some of the revenues, the company would match that same amount, and the aggregated return plus match would be used to reduce the cost of high quality service for the most low income residents of the city. And so in that way, the city used a piece of the revenues it was getting as a mechanism for trying to address another one of its core broadband goals, which was to make service affordable for the lower income community, at the same time as it was also ensuring that service was more competitive for everyone. So an interesting example. It doesn't always play out this way, but there are around the United States thousands of public entities that lease dark fiber or conduit or other assets of the sort. And dark fiber is by far the most common. I think the case in Arlington is one of the best known in Virginia, where Arlington has excess fiber capacity that is available for lease, although it has not had a lot of takers. I think just because the general understanding is that the business terms associated with the dark fiber leases have not been attractive, and does not have to be that way. But in the case of Arlington, this was also excess capacity based on a project that was built for internal county purposes, and the excess capacity is then available to support what could be, ideally great private sector opportunity and competition. I'm going to stop and take a quick breath, and then let me share with you two more models that I think are of real interest. The last two models that we Um, and I, Madam Chair, I don't want to jump in with answering questions without your authorization. But I did see.
Okay, if you want to go ahead and answer that, it's perfectly fine.
Thank you. Having seen that in the text, the partner in Lincoln is a company called Allo Fiber, ALLO, which has pretty substantial fiber holdings that it has built on a competitive basis in both Nebraska and Colorado. Allo, interestingly, as an aside, also has a couple of projects in Colorado where the fiber that, similar to what I just described, but even more extensive, the fiber is ubiquitous throughout the community. So the cities of both Breckenridge and Fort Morgan have built fiber that passes every home and business and institution in their cities. And Allo has leased that fiber from those two cities, taken on all the operating risk, and pays them for it, and also shares revenue with them. So a much more aggressive and ambitious version of the same thing. And there are a handful of companies out there that are open to those kinds of projects. I'm not necessarily recommending that here at all, but I just thought I would mention that as an aside, as it's a completely different business model focused on residential and business broadband, as opposed to the kind of broadband that you are building here. So the last two models that we wanted to present to you are closely related to each other. And what they would assume is that as you light up this particular network, placing communications equipment where necessary, and then providing the services necessary to serve the 5 cities that are the sponsors of this effort, and to enable them to realize the kinds of operational capabilities and efficiencies that a robust, entirely non-constrained fiber network can allow, that it would also be feasible to provide services, not dark fiber, but lit services to a range of other kinds of entities where there could be an additional revenue opportunity, but also additional benefits in terms of creating opportunities for ISPs, including very small ISPs, who would not be able to use dark fiber, but could use lit services, but also to just provide high quality services on the market. Now, there are 2 variations on this model. The first one is relatively constrained, and the second one is far more expansive. In the first one, the provision of services would be to other anchors, mostly public institutions, most likely. But beyond the 5 cities, there will be, in most communities, anchor institutions that are public or quasi-public or nonprofit, and that are important and foundational to the functioning of the community, and who would greatly benefit from this kind of service. And I point out Garrett County, Maryland here, but there are many examples of this sort of thing. So, for example, the city of San Francisco has for a very long time had fiber that was extended to key nonprofits, such as public media, technology nonprofits teaching digital skills, etc., and has provided services to those entities just as part of an extension of the public service mission of the fiber network that the city owns and operates for its own internal needs. And we see this sort of thing in a wide range of different places. In Champaign and Urbana, Illinois, the public fiber network has been extended to many of the churches that serve as community service points, delivering all kinds of services to the community. And the underlying public network provided low-cost services to those churches over a publicly owned infrastructure, just as part of meeting the public mission of that network. We've seen variations on this to Head Start centers, to charter schools, private schools, and other kinds of core community institutions. In many ways, this is an attractive model because it has quite modest additional capital cost that would be just connecting the institutions where necessary, and that would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis to see if it is cost effective. The additional operating cost would be very low because if I understand the planning that the team has been doing around the engineering and operations model for your network, you will already be providing these kinds of services to the 5 cities, and the incremental effort necessary to do so to some additional public sector anchors is extremely low. I'll let Matt jump in and tell me if I have any of that wrong. The structure for this would be internal, although you could certainly outsource it, but given everything that you're doing, you would not need to. Matt, were you just taking yourself off mute to correct me on something?
No, only to agree with you. That's exactly right.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And while the revenue opportunity is not particularly high, certainly the community impact could be very robust. I think it's not a big stretch to go from thinking about government buildings to thinking about these kinds of community institutions as part of an initiative of this sort. The more ambitious variation on that would be lit services, same kinds of lit services, but in the commercial market. And I offer Howard County, Maryland as an example here, in that Howard County has quite successfully used a backbone fiber network to provide service to a wide range of different kinds of entities, including the local public school system, where it has competed for that business, but quite ably, and has brought down costs through that competitive process for the schools. It also serves significant size nonprofit entities in the community and some commercial entities, such as I believe their first customer was a car dealership. I don't know that the revenues are enormous, but they are not insubstantial, and they certainly make the operations and maintenance of the network for internal county purposes much more viable. They just serve to offset some of those costs. And there are other communities where similar things are happening just on a backbone fiber basis. One of the attractions, I think, of this model is that it also allows for provision of services to ISPs at the dark fiber layer if you choose to keep a dark fiber leasing model, but also at the lit services layer. And that means that small ISPs, local and startup ISPs who just want to get into the business and perhaps serve a particular neighborhood where there's a market opportunity because service from existing carriers is not good, or who see a new business opportunity, those kinds of entities are able to buy lit services and without having to light up dark fiber, which takes resources and capacity, they can benefit from this network at the same time. So a wide range of different kinds of customers, including also more sophisticated ISPs. For example, wireless internet service providers, if that market is looking for backbone and backhaul services, and if the network is extended to the locations where they're placing wireless equipment, such as new small cell locations, would also be potential customers for lit services. although most likely they would also be customers for dark fiber. And so this model is more ambitious. It involves more cost and almost certainly more risk. There's more effort around providing services in the commercial space that has a higher cost around the service model, as well as such things as marketing and sales, billing, collections, and so on. But it also potentially could result in considerably more revenues. The operating model is going to be more robust and extensive, and there would be a greater need to build internal capabilities to support something like this. But it is, without question, something that many entities like yours have done, and where I would not doubt your capacity and capabilities to develop this internally if this were the model you wanted to select. So I'm going to stop there after having talked for quite a while, but I'm hoping, Madam Chair, that perhaps we could have some dialogue and questions. And even if not questions, I would love to get feedback, ideas, comments, and concerns.
I think that's great. And thank you so much, Joanne. That was a great, rundown of the different models. So I'll open it up to our members, for questions.
I would just say that's a lot to process, but it's a lot of great information. And it's exactly the type of information that we need right now to think about how we move forward. So thank you.
Others?
Madam
Yes,
Chair?
Mr. Brown.
Just a quick recommendation. First off, Joanne, wow, that was just incredibly interesting information. There's so much to process there. Madam Chair, I want to be sensitive to our authority board members. Just wondered if you wanted to give everybody maybe a 3-minute stretch and comfort break, and then we could get into let people process and maybe get at some questions and conversation.
I think that's a fabulous idea. So why don't we go ahead and make that a 5-minute break, because I don't think anybody can just use 3 minutes. Go ahead and let's come back. Let's just go ahead and make it 7. Let's come back at 2:30.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All righty. See, everybody's trying to file again. Chugging the soda just like I've been doing. Sorry, I
Good
didn't make
call
it.
on Bob's part.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I was glad. As I thought through that, Bob, I was like, I started to get on the call at, and at about 12:20, I thought to myself, and this is like 4 hours. I'm like, we're going to probably need to take a break now. So this was a good timing on that. Even Jay is smiling now, so that's a good sign.
This is fun. I'm a little worried about our council, though. He's lost his bow tie, so this could be serious.
I don't know. Mike's changing it all up. He's no longer in the aqua room with the games behind it, and he's no longer in the bow tie. Like it made me a little nervous, man. It's like
It is a very jaunty Christmas tie. You just can't tell on this little picture.
Oh, well, as long as it's jaunty, then that's better. Good. Yes.
I like the sweater vest. I got a number of those. Those are always good.
Yep. Absolutely.
Does it have a
Absolutely.
What's
That is actually a really casual look for you, Mike.
It is.
That's his casual look.
Yeah. I go out and work on my car wearing this.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
That's it. Deborah, good to see you too.
Yeah, good to see you. I thought I'd show my face for a second here.
I'm so glad you did. Isn't it funny, before COVID, whenever we would all be on calls, and I don't care what your, mechanism was, for years and years, it was Skype or WebEx or, and, we'd always keep the video off. And, that was kind of your common thing. You always kept your video off. Now, I don't know if you all have noticed that, but, turning on the video is kind of our connection to each other. So I'm really glad that, that we've, to everything, there is a silver lining, I always say. And, even though this has certainly been a horrific experience for everyone, it is a kind of a cool thing that we're really utilizing our technology as much as we are now. Thank God for that.
Yeah. I use this more than the telephone now. I like to do everything right. You can see the person. It's really still not in-person meetings, but use what we got.
That's right. So, all right, looks like we're at 2:32. So we are going to be brave, be bold, and we are going to go forward. Joanne, that was an awesome presentation. But again, I know, we've had a little time to process, a little bit of time to kind of go, wow. Has anyone had any additional questions? Does anyone, while you were on your break, did you think about what if? So I'll open it up to the floor one more time before we continue.
So, Madam Chair, I've been real quiet so far listening because
Stephen, I've been noticing that, so I think it's about time.
So we spent a lot of time between the CIOs and CTC and myself putting the package together in a way that would be meaningful information and whatnot. And there's some financial holes that we'll have to fill. But one of the desired outcomes of this meeting really was, and it may be too soon, but we really would have liked to come up with a short list of potential strategies that board members are drawn to or enamored. And so I would kind of like to maybe push the questions and information to that point. I mean, for instance, there's things to think about, the various options we saw. My understanding, for instance, lit fiber means there would probably be more costs that would be shared, but I mean, we would be responsible for the equipment and there'd be a lot more maintenance. So those are things that, I would want you to think about as we move forward. And then in terms of P3, just to kind of show a hand a little bit on the P3, scenario that was talked about. Talking to CDC and Mike, we really need to put together what I would call a not unlikely scenario of what cost and pro forma would look like on that, because it's an important tool, but you can see that there's certain risk involved with that, and the track record's been a little sketchy. So those are things I think we need to think about, and even if we land on 4 or 5 things, I think that Matt, Joanne, Matt, and I need to circle back with the CIOs and look at some costing scenarios. We just didn't have
Stephen,
time to we didn't have time to put that all together. The CTC team met everything we asked for in terms of the business case analysis with regards to cost avoidance, but there are other things to look at. And Mike's actually given us a time, some time. We've sketched out some timelines.
Good. And I do want to review, that's one thing that kind of hit me as we were going through all this and all the different, options, was that, there were some of those, things that I think we probably would need to have a little bit more meat on the bones cost wise, before we could, go back to our cities and say, okay, what are we willing to sign, and where's the support? Where do we want to, what direction do we want to move in? So yeah, that's, I think, a really good point that we probably need kind of for those next steps beyond today. What do we need to be able to make a decision and to be able to, come to January with, so I appreciate those insights. Andrea, you look like you had your hand up.
I had a question, and I apologize if I missed this earlier. For the various cities, it expresses different level of costs that are going to be associated based on what our needs are going to be. And some of us have infrastructure in place already. Some of us don't. Likening this to, 5 friends who go out to dinner, are we all putting our credit cards in when the bill comes? Even though some of us got surf and turf and somebody else got soup and salad, cost it out appropriately per each menu item. Do y'all understand the question?
I think that's a very good analogy, by the way. I love the way you put that. That is, because I think, we've had those discussions, but I mean, that was probably a year and a half ago. But Stephen, you and I've talked about that. Do you want to add in anything there?
Sure. So, we have a $23.8 million aggregate cost, but the fiber ring is only as good as being a complete product. And I think some of the models we've shown, in my opinion, would drive us towards looking at a holistic cost. And I'll give you an example. I think I might get this wrong, but there are like 24 railroad track crossings and 18 bridges. And one of the most expensive parts of the network really is the connection between Norfolk and Portsmouth because of the tunnel. Those costs were allocated to the 2 cities, but really the fiber ring is fairly worthless without that connectivity and the redundancy. So I would just say that I think that I don't know that I like the idea of the model would probably have a sharing concept, an equally sharing concept, and then you get into if you did that and for instance, I'll use an example of the expanded fiber route down Hampton Boulevard with EVMS and Old Dominion and Centerra and customers who said we definitely want to play. Then how do you share the revenue in situations like that? So I'm interested in Joanne. We talked to Matt a little bit about this. That's kind of where my thought process is.
Yeah, I think you have to look at both sides of the equation, Stephen, when you're talking about both the cost revenue share and cost share. So I appreciate that. Or maybe there's some minimal element that we all pay into, and then if I want to supersize my fries, I pay a little bit extra. I don't know. I don't know.
It's a good point because Chesapeake, because their project to build their next generation network was occurring at roughly the same time we were working on this, there were some tremendous efficiencies that I think we came up with perhaps saving it's almost like $1 million in savings. So, we only know what we know now. If we'd known 3 or 4 years ago, there might have been different decisions.
And That's one thing that I looked at this. I think it was back a year and a half ago, maybe. And Bob, you may be able to refresh the memory. But I think the city managers all got together. The 5 city managers got, and they talked a little bit about the cost sharing. And again, it was so early in the process that wasn't. There was certainly nothing locked in stone. But that's a way that maybe we should, really have 5 city managers kind of engage again. And, for a while there, we kind of had the city managers, the CIOs, and then the members, and we, tasked out the CIOs to, they've been doing kind of a deep, technical piece of this, the city managers are doing the governance of this. And then, that perhaps that's some way that we could, move it, work that again as the city managers just really re-engage, and decide that, come together. That might be, and then let us know, what their thoughts are, and if there's, hiccups or issues that they just can't, get beyond. What is everybody's thoughts on that? Would that be a way we could approach that piece for the cost sharing and revenue sharing?
I think it's always good when we can get the city managers together, but I mean, do we want to decide what kind of a model that we want to go to before we're trying to figure out how to divide everything up?
I think that's something that has to be done as well. I think rather than, I think that cost sharing, revenue sharing piece though is something we probably can put onto the city manager plate when it's appropriate, but I agree, Rosemary, we have other fish we have to fry first possibly, but at least that kind of takes that, checks that block right now.
I mean, I also would like to know from CDC if they have any recommendations, because I think deciding on the model is going to be really important, and especially when we put out an RFP. If Steve or our CIOs or CTC, if they have any recommendations.
Recommendations with regard to allocation?
No,
I think regarding the model.
What type of model? I mean, I think the model is going to be important, and then because that's going to create your foundation.
So I think a lot of that depends on your ambitions and appetite for risk. Here's a way of putting it: if you would like to keep risk as low as possible, with the understanding, though, that, or let me actually state this differently. The biggest revenue opportunity could be from an RFP for commercialization, but you would then be sharing the revenues with a private entity. It could be a private entity that's very good at maximizing revenues. The other substantial opportunity for that is to offer lit services pretty widely, but that has a different set of risks. You're not sharing the revenues with anyone, but there's now internal operational capabilities and capacity that have to be built, and everything that comes along with that. It depends on the interest in undertaking that effort, and the desire to build that, as opposed to the desire to enable a private entity to do it. What I might recommend is testing the market with an RFP for commercialization and seeing what that market looks like. I think you might get some very attractive bids, and if you didn't, all the other options could still be on the table.
And just for the group, when she said that commercialization, we're talking about the model where the cities gain the access to the fire ring and all the benefits, basically lease or the excess, which is going to probably be 250 strands or more.
Thank you, Stephen, for that clarification. I'm sorry that I wasn't more at it. We would not recommend any model in which the cities don't control the core asset and meet all of their own internal needs. Of the models we've put before you, the only one that would not involve that is the concessionaire model, and that's the one we would probably least recommend among all the options that are before you. So as a starting point, we would recommend build the network, and not subsequently, but simultaneously plan for how you will stand up an operation to meet all of your internal city needs, and you will be some of the best served cities in America with some of the best internal communication services in America. And that's a really good starting point. And Matt has presented the economics to you. And then again, simultaneously, not subsequently, consider what the business opportunity looks like for that excess fiber that Stephen just described. But that would be in addition to, as an alternative to operating the network for your own needs. And that in addition to model could be either it's a competitive process to select a partner with capabilities who will do that and who will give you some base revenues as well as having some kind of a meaningful revenue share between the two entities, or taking it on yourselves to do that commercialization piece. And we presented 3 different models for what it could look like to do it yourselves.
Thank you. Al, did you want to, Mr. Moore, did you want to, I think you had a question or you were trying to speak?
I didn't hear what Joanne had said in the beginning, but I think she just clarified something for me. I had a little technical blurb over here and missed when she was speaking initially. So I think I just got the gist just then. Thank you.
All right, great. And Ms. McClellan, I think you had a question or you were getting ready to say something?
Sure. I mean, I would just say that certainly agree that the cities have to be able to maintain and have our services paid for. That's a foundational. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of completely giving up complete control over that additional asset. It's been referenced previously. We have a toll on a tunnel here that everybody's pretty sore about. It's an asset that we sort of gave away, and we have no control over the future of that, and it's very limiting. And I'm concerned that if we just gave that away, we could create another incumbent situation. We aren't able to deal with some of the ideas that were presented, like in Lincoln, et cetera. But I don't think that we have the capacity to build, market, and maintain this either. So I don't know exactly where that stands, but that's just my 2 thoughts there, if that's helpful.
So I think we can learn a lot what happened with the tunnel, things to avoid. And I think that if we have a lease situation and then put in a lot of the controls, and then make sure that the cities and the schools and the EMS and providers are protected, I think that might be a good way to at least look at things, especially now. I mean, we don't really know what revenues are going to be. Even when things get back on track, we're maybe trying to play catch up with our revenues and all the things that we've had to put off because of this pandemic. I think these are very dicey times right now. And I think the less risk, the better would be good. And then you've got a whole entity of marketing and strategy. This is something that we've never done before. It's, sometimes the private sector can do a better job than we can do. Not always, but sometimes. But maybe if there's some type of, maybe it doesn't have to be totally one of the different ones that she showed us, maybe it could be something that could be cobbled together where, we can get the best of all the different worlds and make a good thing happen. But I think the less risk right now, the better. We need to protect ourselves, obviously, and then make sure that our taxpayers are protected. But I would be interested in more of the commercialization.
To say, so your interest would be in commercialization, not the PPP, because I was just trying to.
I would be interested.
From what you were actually describing, it sounded like you were suggesting a PPP commercialization, embrace the private sector in that commercialization. Is that?
Well, it would be nice to put the debt service back on us. We all have plenty of that to go around. And maybe we put out an RFP and see what comes out. Just like what they said, we may find some interesting opportunities, and could be a really good deal for our taxpayers and for the cities, and being able to get the services that we need, and then to attract the businesses and the data services and all the different things that are going to be coming in. I mean, we're already seeing it at Virginia Beach just because of the cables coming in and the platform is going off, the off ramp. I mean, we're already getting businesses coming in. So with this, it's going to be even greater.
Yeah, that's the point. And, I think revenues are going to be significant. That quite yet. Other comment.
Could you all put the slide up that had those various options so that we could reference those during the discussion?
I was just going to say that's a great thing.
Joanna?
And Mr.
Joanna?
Jones, I think you had a question.
One of my recommendations was going to be that, we can have maybe 2 or a maximum of 3 different avenues. We hold like a joint meeting all 5 cities in under a year. It may not be as well as surprised as previous 2. We get that are sort of by break or they know what's going on.
That's a good point, Daniel. Maybe having a joint meeting with the city managers and, explain maybe our top 2 areas of interest as models of interest. Oh.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. And you were a little choppy to me, but that could have just been me. Was anybody else? I think I got the gist of what you were saying, but did anybody else have a?
It was hard to, the connection's bad, but I think Mike was saying that we're going to have show credit worthiness before we go out for finance. Was that what you're saying, Mike?
Really? Yeah.
Maybe. Hey, Mike, maybe if you turn off your video,
Turn off your video, Mike, and then that might help you to be a little clearer.
Okay.
Let's try that.
Is this a little better?
Yes. There you go. Now, could you just go ahead? Why don't you go and repeat that for the record?
What I was saying was, we're going to need a comprehensive or regional agreement among the 5 cities in order to be creditable. I was working on a couple of other financings earlier this fall for different things and took the opportunity to pick the brains of some smart FAs for free for y'all. And that was one of the key things that they told us, was that we need a regional user agreement.
Okay. So again, that's something that, probably could be hashed out with the city managers, of course.
Susan, one idea as I'm thinking about it is there could be, to Rosemary's point, a bit of a blended model where the number of strands that we use for internal purposes, let's say it's 10, we have this other excess capacity, and maybe we double what our needs are, and then each city can utilize those as we see fit, if that makes sense. To use, if we want to use it for economic development purposes, if we want to use it for underserved communities. I'm just trying to, the idea of completely giving up total control other than that which we're going to use for municipal buildings and schools is problematic to me.
Sure. In the 30% design, I think we said that each city would have 8 strands, but that was just, we kind of pulled that out of the air. It made sense, but if each city would go back and look at the specific areas you mentioned, we could make that more finite, and I think that would be a good blend. And I think at some point, Joanne, if you could go back, since the slide is up, there are just subtle differences between commercialization, dark fiber leasing, and lit services. If you could just maybe a sentence or two again, now that people have digested some of this, because that goes back into Ms. McClellan's question as to, we can maintain control, but give up some things. But what I'm hearing, and I think we still have to have more discussion too, the P3 is not an area that you've seen a lot of success or been enamored with.
Joanne, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was searching for the mute button. That was very embarrassing. It took me a while to find. Yeah, the P3 concessionaire model, I am very cautious about. There is real potential to it, and I think that it is going to be attractive for entities that feel that they really would like to have very limited involvement themselves, but would like to own the asset and would like to be able to impact how this happens through a contract and oversight of a contractor.
Excuse me, Joanne, I'm so sorry. Would you mind, you're also being very ear intermittent as well. Would you mind maybe turning off your video? I'm sorry, because I'm having difficulty. Are you, Susan?
I am, yes. I think that's yeah.
Okay, yes, sorry about that. By the way, just as an aside, in 2020, we shouldn't be encountering these kinds of difficulties. We've still got a long way to go with our broadband infrastructure, unfortunately, and this was a perfect illustration of that.
Ironic, isn't it?
It is. I'm living out of an Airbnb, and I'm unfortunately struggling with connectivity. But it's not like I'm in a rural area. I am, just north of Fort Lauderdale. We should not be in this place. And there's so much use of the internet at this hour and this is a perfect illustration, right? Lots of calls like ours going on at all times. But we have learned that lesson from the pandemic, because we need to pay more attention to our internet environment as a nation. Anyway, I will stop on that and answer the questions that were just posed. My point was that I think the concessionaire model holds enormous promise for entities that really would like their only involvement to be in shaping a project or a contract and then overseeing a contractor who is their concessionaire over a long period of time. And there is lost opportunity that comes with a concessionaire model in terms of data control. And I think that is reflected in some of the comments where there's, concern, let's not go down the road where we have no control. That is much like the tunnel or other kinds of, there are lots of highway projects and toll road projects like that where communities feel they don't have enough control. But those projects were entered into because they allow for a turnkey solution by a private entity. The other models that we have in front of us here, and I should reorganize this slide before we send it to you, but if you look at the first item and the last three items, all of those involve building a structure within internal to all of you. But the first one where I've used the term commercialization, it's really developing the business strategy for the excess fiber through a private partner that has those capabilities, but divorcing that from the design and internal operations to meet your own needs. And then the last three on this slide, the final three items, would be actually doing the commercialization piece yourselves. In the first one, where I have authority dark fiber leasing, you would be leasing out dark fiber. And in the second one, you would be selling lit services to public and quasi-public and anchor institution type entities. And in the third one, you would be selling lit services to any kind, a wide range of different entities without limitation. And all of those would give you maximum day-to-day control.
So Joanne, I have a quick question on that. For the, I think I understand the last three fairly well. The private, the first one, the private commercialization, certainly it seems, there's some really good advantages there. I guess my one concern, or maybe you can enlighten me, is how much, I think many goals we have of this ring is to increase competition, to be able to provide that. What would this private commercialization, how would that affect our, to be sure that there was competition, that wasn't just, one provider buying everything and then saying, okay, now I'm going to, jelly that up the way I want, and potentially we run into, oligopoly or monopoly type scenario that we, would obviously would not be advantageous for our communities and our citizens. To speak to that,
absolutely, you would make that an absolute requirement of the RFP. So that's require that private company to sell services on a non-discriminatory basis broadly to a wide range of different kinds of entities. My guess is that most of the entities that would bid on this kind of a commercialization opportunity would do that anyway, because they would feel that the revenue opportunities were greater. There are only two companies that might want to have exclusive use themselves, and I haven't seen them bid on this sort of thing, but one never knows. But you can just build it into the requirements of the RFP with metrics for ensuring that they meet certain kinds of milestones in that regard. And usually companies will want long-term opportunities so that they can build this over time and they've got business certainty, but you can have check-ins so that if they are not actually successfully doing exactly this, which is creating this new competitive opportunity, the contract could be terminated or would automatically terminate if they haven't met certain milestones.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
that's something that Suffolk would really be behind, because that's our biggest key here, is that we have some open competitiveness in the whole process.
Yeah. I think that's all of us are very concerned about that. We definitely want to make sure that, we're opening up competition. Yes, Ms. McClellan.
Another piece of the puzzle that I want to make sure, and again, I apologize if I tuned out for this piece, but how does the access to the subsea cables coming in from Virginia Beach differentiate our product from perhaps some of the others that we've discussed, or does it?
Let me ask Matt to start with that from sort of a technical and operation standpoint, and then I'll speak to the market as I see it. Matt might also be searching for the mute button.
I'm sorry, I was actually having a bit of a connection problem myself there. Can you repeat the question for me?
Matt, my question was how does the effect of, or the relationship to the subsea cables coming into Virginia Beach, as opposed to this just being a ring in and of itself, but adding a component to it, does that change the dynamics compared to what you're seeing elsewhere?
It does. It's actually a really, really exciting and positive component that is pretty darn unique, actually. Frankly, it's a thing that got me so very excited about this project when we saw the other come out, that we responded to be brought in on the team. There's potentially, well, just number one, it puts you at the center of some enormous internet infrastructure. There's a few places in the country that are just known to be geographic hubs of the internet. The DC area obviously is one of them, and specifically actually western suburb in Loudoun County called Ashburn, where quite literally probably something around, depending on who you ask and what metrics you use, something about a third of the internet goes through there. I'm aware of investments right now building fiber between you and Ashburn, simply to take advantage of that transatlantic landing. You're going to have every carrier who matters in your commercial co-location facilities sitting on your backbone ring. So your ring then becomes essentially a direct hop onto the super highway, so to speak, the true interstate of the internet, in a way that most other communities, they can have big connections, but they are generally going through one or two tiers of providers before they get to anything even close to equivalent as what you're going to have. All it does is just support the idea that there's going to be demand for that fiber regionally that can be used by lots of carriers. It's hard to quantify that because it's such a unique situation, but it only promotes it and supports it in every way that matters to you.
So with that in mind, I think we need to be careful that we understand and leverage the asset that we have. And I don't think that I don't get the impression that anybody within the authority's 5-member area that we really want to take this on ourselves necessarily. But I also want to make sure that we recognize and get the most and leverage this incredible asset that we have. So that's all. I'm stating the obvious, Susan. Sorry.
No, Andrea, that's I agree 100%. We do need to recognize that, we are in a little bit more unique space than some of even the, Pennsylvania Turnpike in Arlington County and Garrett. And I mean, of course, every group is going to say we're unique, but we really are unique. No, we really are the real thing. We definitely are, in a position that, frankly, there's only 2 other cities on the East Coast that can, say the same thing. And so we have to be very careful on, giving away an advantage that we already have. And so I think that's a very valid concern. We want to make sure that we're really thoughtful about. With that, I think that, and as we kind of, and certainly I want everybody, if you feel like you have another question, certainly, please speak up. And I apologize when we are in this presenting mode. If your name doesn't highlight me, obviously, then do, speak up or put your, go in the chat and just say, hey, I have a question, and I'll make sure I see that. Because I may not see you right away.
Susan, Daniel and Rosemary have their hands raised under their first.
Good. Thank you, because I can't really see that. So, Daniel, why don't you go ahead?
Mine was from earlier there.
Oh, okay. So, are you good?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. And Rosemary, you have something else that you want to add?
I do. Thank you. So, Andrea, thank you for pointing out the obvious that sometimes we need to remind ourselves that these cables coming in puts us in a really unique spot. There's a couple things that I just wanted to ask about. One, because we are in such a unique position and because of all the DoD assets that are here, and it seems to be sometimes money available in DC for those kind of things. Are we looking into those? And I don't need an answer right now. I just want to put this out there for maybe, are we looking into, is there money that we're not getting or we haven't looked into getting for what we want to do? And the second thing I wanted to mention is we really need to make sure that we keep security in our minds. This is going to be a very valuable asset, and we want to include everything that we're doing, how we're going to secure and keep it safe. So those are 2 points that I wanted to make.
Yeah, and Matt, I think we had a discussion about that earlier, before too. Matt, would you like to chat, or Joanne? But I know Matt, we had talked about that. Would you like to maybe say a few words on that security piece?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said there. I would say that there's nothing like having your own dark fiber infrastructure for controlling your security on a network. It puts everything in from the physical layers on up in your control. So from that perspective, any alternative that involves commercial carriers diminishes that to some degree. And when we think of security, a lot of times, we're thinking in terms of this type of hacks and attacks and those type of things that are, clicking on the wrong link in an email and taking you someplace that infects your computer. There's more to it than that, particularly when we think about critical infrastructure and survivability of networks. The physical layer becomes very important. Having hub electronics and a network architecture designed for survivability, depending on the kind of emergency situation or attack that exists. So having physical redundancy that extends out to the user, in this case, the municipalities, having the core electronics in secure facilities that are only accessible to municipal staff or trusted contractors, having backup generators, supply chains for fuel and things of that nature that really it impacts the overall availability and resiliency of the network. You can't get that if you don't own and control every aspect of the network without paying to a degree that you may as well have bought it yourself anyway. If that answers the question, there's a lot to say about security.
That's a large subject, right?
And it's more than just like hacking and getting into the networks, but also the security of the fiber and the ring itself.
You mean the physical security that he was talking about, right?
Security of the infrastructure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And you don't know when you lease a service from a commercial carrier how they're operating that aspect of their network, how they're maintaining it, whether they're rightfully so. Their intent is ultimately to maximize profits. So if providing a service that is available 99.9% of the time is good enough to meet their requirements, but that helps them manage costs, then that's what they're going to do. But 3 nines, what I just described there, sounds good, but it's actually nowhere near the target when we talk about public safety types of applications. The gold standard there is 5 nines or more. 99.999% of the time you want that network to be available and functioning properly. And that's a lot harder to achieve. There's a lot of extra cost around getting those last couple of nines. But they're ones that, in the case of the things that municipal governments do, they can mean the difference between having systems available to save lives or not. It's only really important when things get really bad, but that's when these networks have to operate, and that's when government services have to function properly. So, simply put, the commercial carrier industry, generally speaking, is not aligned with public safety grade applications unless you buy duplicative services and arrange for service level agreements that guarantee you things and have penalties around them that are far beyond just a discount on your bill. And that's just uncommon.
So Matt, would you say that the design work that's been done thus far has taken those precautions into effect or into account rather?
Absolutely. It's at the core of how we think of it. I probably wouldn't allow you to steer me in any direction otherwise. When we talk about the ring, that's a big part of it right there. But what we're looking at is bringing that physical diversity of the connectivity in from into each of the facilities that are important on this network to connect to each of the jurisdictions. So absolutely, that's taken into account at every level.
Right. So, so we have a really good foundation on that. And I don't think, that we ever will take our eye off that ball, but it's always good. And Rosemary, thank you for pointing that out, because it is a good point to bring up that, we always want to make sure that security is, right there baked in from the beginning. So that's great. Other comments?
Madam Chair, could I bring us back to a point? One of the questions I'd asked was when we brought this chart up, Joanne had Matt go through the technical side, and then she was going to pick it up with some questions. We had actually scheduled some time earlier to make sure that all the authority members were kind of aligned around a similar vision and mission long term for this. And so, if we could just make sure, maybe talk about that a little bit. It was in one of the slide decks, but also, without locking in on one or two based on that mission and vision. I think you guys have CTC has a good understanding of that. Based on that and the stated objectives about wanting to maintain a level of control, because this is an asset that it's probably beyond our means to understand just how important it is now. Is there one or two models that really stand out? And Mike Lockerbie's had some experience in this too, but could we have a discussion around that? Because really get to it. What does it look like to you compared to other options?
Stephen, this is Joanne. Was that a question addressed to me?
Well, both. I think to you and Matt, but also to the authority members, because I think that we don't have a strategic plan yet. We have thoughts, and we have a rough plan that was developed during the 30% stage. So we'll have to get to that point. But I just want to make sure that we're aligned on vision and mission, so that when we start down this road of the cost analysis, that we're really true to what we believe this. And then specifically of these options that we've talked about, are there two that you think, based on experience, points more to what we're trying to do? Sounds like we want to reduce cost and have cost avoidance as much as possible, but we want to maintain some level of control because it is a valuable asset. There are things other than the economy that the cities would be looking at also.
Yeah, I will just share based on everything I've heard from all of you in the past hour, and I'm making notes and thinking it through and trying to synthesize. And I wish I could edit my slide in real time to reflect two different models, but I think what we have converged on is that top line model private fiber commercialization as one option, and the bottom three models, and we'll call it public fiber commercialization, as the second model. So in one case, you use a private RFP to select a partner that has to meet certain kinds of goals for enabling competition and enabling ISPs and businesses to really flourish in your region. And in the other case, you take on that set of tasks yourselves. Either way, it's directed at the same set of goals and vision, which is that you're building an asset that will have a lifetime of many, many decades, and that is foundational to the operations of the 5 cities, but is also potentially foundational to even more economic vitality and opportunity within the 5 cities. The asset itself is not going to reach homes and it's not going to reach small businesses, but it's going to enable other entities to do that. And it could potentially reach larger enterprises and certainly enable the commercial ISP market and perhaps nonprofits who are focused on broadband and the digital divide, enable them to flourish as well. And the question, I think, is not whether this gets commercialized. It sounds like you're all in agreement about that. The question is, do you do it through a private entity that you select through a competitive market, or do you do it internally by building that internal capacity within your own entity that you have stood up together? And then what is the business model of that internal entity? Is it just dark fiber? Is it limited number of potential customers, or is it, let's go and do this for every potential commercial customer we can? So first question is private partner with performance metrics, or public sector, let's build this capability ourselves? That's the first question. And then the second question is, what does the customer base potentially look like if we do it ourselves, and how ambitious are we going to be about the operating model? I can't answer those questions for you, but that's how I would frame it in light of what I've heard today, and suggest that refining from that is the next task before us.
Can I ask a question? Because maybe I'm missing something, but I see there's a step in between, and maybe it's included in the first, but the idea where we commercialize it, we have a private entity do that for us, but that we still have control over. Is that, I think we still want to have some element of control, but we want another private entity to do all the marketing, the build out, the maintenance.
So that would be something we could put in the RFP, right? We would just say, the way I look at it, and Joanne, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but that's kind of what my concerns were too when we first started talking about that private commercialization is, it sounded to me like it allows us to do just what you're saying, Andrea, that, it allows us to determine what we put in the RFP will be up to us on how much control and how much we want to provide, to the private, sector, and how much we want to retain. Joanne, am I accurate in my understanding of that?
Yes, I think absolutely. And we would absolutely recommend a private commercialization. You would want a framework for where you want to give them day-to-day operational control and where you want it yourselves and how you want to govern it. I will say, just at a high level without getting too detailed, our recommendation would be you don't want to do this on a day-to-day basis. You don't want to be micromanaging a private partner in this way. And I think if you were contemplating day-to-day management, there wouldn't be a lot of interest by a private partner. They need to be able to do what they want to do. But the way to maintain control there is to lay out clear goals for what they have to do, restrictions on what they can and can't do. So for example, to an example somebody brought up a little while ago, they can't go and lease 100% of the capacity to one entity, thus tying it up in monopoly, right? Has to be open, has to be non-discriminatory, has to be priced in a way that encourages competition, perhaps with preferred pricing. And I'm being totally hypothetical here, but preferred pricing for local companies, preferred pricing for nonprofits that make commitments to serve lower income areas. There are all kinds of ways to structure it. And you put that set of parameters around it, ask them to bid based on those parameters, and then potentially structure compensation around them meeting those parameters or revenue share around meeting those parameters with frequent check-ins. So let's say at the 2-year mark or the 3-year mark, because they need time to be able to commercialize. But let's say at that 3-year mark, if they have certain thresholds, compensation changes, or if they haven't met those thresholds, maybe the arrangement comes to an end and then you are free to go ahead and find someone else. So you're kind of governing and shaping through big picture strategy rather than through day-to-day control. And then I think it gives you the big picture control that you want without putting you in the place of having to managing and second guess a company that you hopefully select because they're able to really go and make this happen.
All right. Andrew, does that answer that question for you? I mean, you feel. And Bob, do you have a question?
Thank you, Susan. Joanne, if I could follow up, and I'm just trying to think through this a bit. So, listening to everything that the people I work for have said over the past couple of years, I really like what you sort of just connected the dots on and how you've laid that out, and a lot of conversation to continue to form that. But I think that starts to go down a track that I've heard a lot of combining all of our conversation that might be a strategy worth considering. I'm trying to wrap my mind around sort of the business case now, and we've talked a lot about the business case for us. I'm trying to think about the business case now for that private provider on the other end, if I may. And Ms. McClellan and Ms. Vitelli, this is you and others' expertise with what your experience and what you do. So my question is, Joanne, if I can form this correctly, one approach is that we would go out for this model that you've just outlined of a private fiber commercialization with an RFP. And I like how you describe that with performance measures that entity will need to meet. And I also like what you said that we don't want to do the day-to-day management. That would be the commercial entity. And that within that, we would lay out clear goals and performance measures for the various things that you stated that I won't repeat. But as we think about that, to make it attractive for someone to bid on that, and also to make it attractive for, I'm going to call it subleasees, if you will, right? So let's say Ms. McClellan's the company that gets the bid, and Ms. Vitelli's company and my company want to ride that fiber under Ms. McClellan. To maintain control over those performance measures, does it make sense for the authority to have part of the upfront capital cost sharing? In other words, are we in a better position to outline those things? And I'm just playing with numbers here. Round cost of $24 million to construct the Southside fiber ring. Would we be in a better position to establish those performance metrics if our authority brought $12 million to the table and then asked the private entity to bring in $12 million? Are those part of the considerations, Joanne, that we need to be thinking about?
That's a really interesting model. And let me start with this. This could be tested, right? The beauty of citing your project is that all of this could be tested through a procurement process or even an RFI process to see what level of interest there is on the commercial side. I think a 50-50 split on capital costs feels unlikely because I don't know that having to put half the capital to the table would be enough to, it might just decrease the number of interested entities. But a more modest amount could possibly be feasible with that entity then, as a result, potentially wanting a higher share of the revenues than would be the case if they were not bringing capital to the table. And it could be structured that they contribute to the capital costs or that there is some kind of an upfront or base payment that they pay in return for this opportunity. The latter might be the way to do it if the RFP postdates the decision to build the network, and the former might be the way to do it if you're going to select a private partner before building the network, while this could still serve to offset your capital costs in the early phases, although it can always be applied later on, but there would be no guarantee about it. But I think the central insight there is that if they have skin in the game, they are more likely to perform. And I think that's a really important insight, and it should absolutely be structured that way so that there is financial pain for a company that takes this on but doesn't perform.
Okay. Bob, did that kind of answer your question, or?
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for helping me think through that. I appreciate it.
So, other questions? Anything else that anyone would like to discuss? Stephen, look like you might be getting ready to talk.
No, I'm listening intently.
Awesome.
Madam Chair, I believe I see Mr. Jones with a raised hand there.
All righty. Daniel, what is up? What do you want to say?
The other technical to correct me if I'm wrong. If it starts looking at options 4 and 5, is currently budgeted. Because you're talking
Daniel,
about,
I think we're having a hard time. Is it just me, or can y'all not hear him too? I hear people tapping their ears and not able to hear. Are you? And I don't think your video is on, is it? So can you try again?
Can everybody hear me now?
Yeah, better. Thank you.
Okay. What I was saying, if the authority starts looking at options 4 and 5, providing the lit service either way, that there's going to be an increased cost in equipment that is not currently budgeted, because you start talking about optics at that point in time, and that's going to increase, as well as there's going to be a service level agreement that's already been discussed that the authority would have to meet in the 5 nines range for these customers. So just keep that in mind, that current feasible figure that we're talking about, if we're looking at 4 and 5, is not accurate.
That's a good point. So thank you on that. I'm going to go to Peter, who has his hand raised, and then I just want to kind of maybe synthesize it a little bit, see if we can get a little consensus. But first, over to you, Peter.
All right, thank you. Good discussion and a lot of great opportunity. Daniel kind of touched on a little bit. I think that we're to make sure that we look at the TCO for all the options. We got to make sure that we address our costs as far as cities and alignment, and even the equipment to do certain things that want to go beyond the dark fiber, and also the cost allocation. And let's not forget about the NOC and the SOC that also runs this thing. So I think the CIOs need to get together to make sure what that decision may look like if we do decide to go any one of those routes.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And kind of to my, where I was going with this. So thank you for kind of leading us that way. One of the things I was going to ask if I'm hearing a lot of, and just tell me if I'm wrong, but this is what I'm hearing in our discussion so far is that the concessionaire or the PPP, that second option is one that we are not really entertaining at this point. They have not recommended it from our, valuable, contracting partner here. It has a higher risk. It has a higher potential opportunity for operating costs, and so I'm hearing from across the board that doesn't seem to be one that we are gravitating to, which we are gravitating. It sounds like we are gravitating more towards that first option. And so in light of trying to maybe come to some consensus on at least the model that we feel has the most potential for us. What I'm hearing, and again, I'd like to have some feedback here, is that our first option that we are entertaining is that private fiber commercialization, and that we would obviously with the RFP being our control mechanism to allow us to control, assign the appropriate controls that we would feel comfortable retaining and relinquishing. And then maybe, I guess what I would like to know now is if that's our number one, if we were to have a number two that you would entertain, would there be interest in the lit services, or is that something that we can agree would be, off the table for us, or at least something that we are not as interested in entertaining? So a little bit of comment there, particularly to option 4 and 5.
Susan, I would suggest that a minor amount of that. So for example, if we retained an additional amount of fiber that we could control individually, and we'd have to do that in the RFP with the private vendor. But so for example, getting to that issue of providing it directly to our nonprofits or to others that are not municipally owned, we could have a carve out for that. Does that make sense?
So in other words, having, in lieu of us standing up an organization that, and having all the overhead of doing lit services, that we would still be able to ensure we have the competition, the nonprofit. I mean, I think, that the perhaps preferred pricing for, nonprofits, all those things as delineated in the RFP for the option number 1. Is that?
Yeah, as I think about that, I think it would have to be a carve out from the first option, because I don't think we could control our lit. I mean, you're going to need somebody who's either all in to do the maintenance, et cetera. So I rescind my idea as I think through it. But I think it's maybe just a function.
I hope I didn't.
And the
I
RFP.
wasn't trying to redirect you or.
No, it's again that just wanting to have a little bit of control over some, what our mission and our goals are, which I think are ultimately we're trying to create better quality of life and better opportunities for businesses. That's what we all want, right? And when we do that through access to high-speed internet, and that can come in the form of, either more competitive cost and pricing, but we need to have a little bit of control over that. I think that's our concern.
Madam Chair, could I just one data point, and it really ties back to what the chair and the vice chair said, but also to what Peter said about the added expense of lit. I think the other option is the fiber, and we talked a little bit about that, but the leasing the dark fiber, Joanna said, is not quite as much revenue, obviously, as the first choice, but it would be one that would retain some level of control, because we're just leasing to ISPs, and they would be responsible for the equipment that Peter talked about.
So Stephen, and you're referring to option number 3, authority, dark fiber leasing.
Number 3, I think.
So you might wonder why I went in the order I did, where I said, okay, first one, I think we're all in agreement that that's a priority option that we all kind of tend to gravitate to. To option number 2, we're not really in alignment with. I think, we can probably, put that at the bottom of our list. And then lit services also would probably fall towards the bottom of our list because of the requirement that it would have the overhead that we may not be able to, really, be able to provide, which leaves option number 3, that authority dark fiber leasing, that perhaps, as Stephen just pointed out, and I promise I did not pay him to do that, that, it seemed to me that those 2 options in some combination, when we talk about our hybrid, and I think, Rosemary, when we first kind of kicked off the comments and you said, could we do some kind of, combination hybrid of, them? I think, to me, the hybrid would be option number 1 and option number 3. Primarily option number 1 with a little bit of 3 thrown in there in whatever way our city managers and our CIOs deem would be the right mix, and then bringing that to us to say, here's what we could think would be about right, and allow us to kind of review that. So I throw that out there because I think we do, we have about less than an hour left in our call. I think we certainly want to be able to we don't need to make a full up decision. That's not what this call is about. But coming out of this workshop, I think that we'd certainly want to be able to at least have an idea of where we're going, and maybe some next steps. And so with that said, how does everybody feel about those options and kind of how I've laid those out? Is that something that everybody can get behind? And if you're not, please voice that as well. I know you will, but I encourage, I certainly want to hear all that.
I think that's really well said. And, I think a hybrid might fit our needs the best. And I think it'd be good if we let some of the professionals get in and sort of work out the details, which could be our city managers. We may need to get some financial people in there, especially if we're looking at an RFP. And of course, the informational officers, they've got to get in there. So we can get our teams from our cities together and sort of work out some of these details and then come back with some proposals for us. I think that'd be a great next step.
Rosemary, thank you so much for that. Other thoughts, other comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would agree 1,000% with the 1 and the 3. That's where exactly I was going, the hybrid approach. I would even say with number 3, we do not necessarily an RFP, but something of that nature where we reach out and say we have X percentage of a network available for lease and have providers bid on it in that type of a fashion. And I would also caution the 4 and 5 for what I've already said, but also from a standpoint, this authority was stood up in our number 1 talking point is we're not going to compete. 4 and 5, we start competing. So I think if we deviate from that, that's going to be hard to recover.
Way to keep us on point, Daniel. That's a great point.
Susan, I would say for Daniel's comment, if it would almost be like an RFI if we were looking at number 3, right, where we're out there sort of soliciting, which I don't know if we can put an RFP out in the market and put an RFI on the market at the same time.
Well, but if we do something that's combined, we could potentially have that, I think that, let's put it this way. I think that we have a lot of smart people, as we all know, working in our cities. And I think that if we give them the guidance at our level, that these are this is kind of what we're looking at doing. Let's leave it up to them on how they can, make the sausage work, and be able to, get us something, options for how that would pan out. Does that seem reasonable to everybody? I mean, I don't want to. Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. The next thing I want to just mention was we talked about, the fact that we need to have, some, and Mike, this is for you, man. That we need to have the, regional, user agreement. And some of that, I think, how the governance, I think some of that might be able to be done parallel path with, this, with the RFP / with this, modeling. So I just want to keep that in mind, that we certainly could start this off by having a joint, this joint city manager and, authority meeting. Maybe that's, I don't know if that's what would happen in our January, or if we want to, invite them to the January meeting. That might be a great opportunity to, kind of give them insight. What are the thoughts on that? Because I know we just said we wanted to have some kind of joint meeting, some kind of ability to get them up to speed so that they understand that we're going to be asking them to get together and do some cost and revenue sharing, work, as well as maybe some governance, and maybe even define some of the RFP goals in more detail. So would it be, a good idea to have them invited to our next, our January meeting? Thoughts? Stephen, I'll pass that on you.
Okay, so I've been listening intently again. So there's a couple of things, comments I would make, where Ms. McClellan and Daniel spoke. The beauty of the 1 and the 3 and the RFP or the RFI, and Mike will help us walk through that, is it really will help us get to cost too, because I think it would help us provide, okay, this is the cost of the ring. This is what we think we can offset in terms of cost avoidance, but this is also the revenue that we think we can generate. To answer your last question about inviting the city managers, I think, we want to decide what's the intended outcome of that meeting, and how does this, we've talked about getting the cities together, best minds, and work through this, kind of maybe talk a little bit about what does that look like? What's the logistics for doing that? Is it for instance, do Mike and CTC and I provide a proposed RFP, RFI for each of the options? I think just a bit on what that might look like.
Well, and Mike, did you want to, Mike, you look like you're trying to speak.
Yeah, I'm trying to, like Stephen, I'm listening so intently, I'm having trouble with formulating what I want to say, but I was just going to say it's clearly important for the CIOs to get together, as Daniel brought up, and discuss the private fiber commercialization and the dark fiber leasing models. And I'm hearing from all you on the board that it's important to get the city managers in the room at our next meeting, or at some point in the not too distant future. I'm about 98% sure that Ms. Weitzel and I, as finance and procurement folks, would also like to talk with the finance and procurement folks about the details of how these things would work from the procurement angle, and in terms of keeping the financial risk and the cost of capital, both either to the cities or just to the system, if we're going to take this out and have the cities not be financially supportive of it, function. There's a lot of details there that honestly the finance and procurement dorks need to look at. Is that okay by the board if we do that?
Minus the
Michael
dorks part,
smiling.
I'm okay. Yeah, Andrea and I are both kind of like, maybe minus the dorks, since that. But I get your point.
I mean, I suggested getting the financial and the CI. It's pretty much what I did. So should be okay with me then.
All right, I appreciate that consensus to move forward on trying to pull that information together. Thank you.
Stephen, did you have another, issue, or you were trying to just say you wanted to get some, clarity? Were you asking for clarity on what are you making a recommendation for us?
Mike actually articulated my position better. I think we're talking about this, but what does it look like? And I think maybe that initial meeting, we can pull that together with the right financial and contractual folks and CIOs and start looking at that.
Okay, good. So that answered your concerns.
Yes.
Yay.
Yay.
I like always to keep the executive director happy. That's like a.
I'm happy. I just want to make sure you guys are happy.
I think we're all in happiness mode here. Okay. So I guess the other question I had for Stephen, we talked about a more detailed financial picture. Is that what you're talking about? Then, that's what we would do with the financial group. I'm not going to say the
Right.
D word, but
yeah, one of the outcomes was financial analysis, and that ED would provide that. I think, in terms of an oversight, it's really what Mike and Ms. Wilson talked about. Let's get the.
I'm going to pin the
folks.
rose on you to be leading that effort. Correct?
Pardon me?
I'm going to pin the rose on you to lead that effort then, and make sure that we're great.
Right.
Thank you for that. Okay, so that actually hit most of the things that I wanted to kind of glean out of our discussions today. What other concerns do the board members have? And certainly Stephen and Bob, you as well. Are there anything else that we need to make sure that we've got our next steps, or is anybody confused on what the next steps will be? Do we need to go over the timeline a little bit? Maybe?
This is Al.
I'm sensitive to the timeline because I think I'm sensitive to that date, and we've just kind of laid out some aggressive actions that have to occur over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy, busy time.
Right.
Al, did you want to speak?
Yes, if I may. After the accounting and the CIOs get together, are we going to bring that back to the city managers at that time? Is that our next step after that?
Stephen, I'm gonna, you look like you're about to talk, so I don't want to interrupt you.
I was looking at some of the questions, so I missed. Was that Al? I missed the question.
Yes. After you work with the accounting folks and also with the CIOs, are you bringing it back to the CAOs at that point?
Well, I think it'll be collaborative. I'm not quite sure what the 10 steps will be, but I think yes, they will be involved in every piece of the step. I think the first step would be to get, at a minimum, the financial folks and legal together to talk about, the cost of money, RFPs and things like that.
Hey, Susan.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Andrea?
I have a related but not quite on topic question before we leave today. I just wanted to find a status update on the website going live.
Okay. I'll make sure that we cover that. Do you want to? We'll finish this and then I'll make sure we get that on there. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Regina.
Yes. As we prepare our budgets, and I know I'm getting into this, is anything change as far as what we should anticipate and put it in the budget? Because I know December is kind of like our deadline for that. And I know each of the localities have a commitment for that, but just wanted to be sure if there's any changes in the, I guess, the shares of the contribution.
Are you referring to the ring sharing, or are you just talking about the administration of the authority? Which
I'm talking about the design cost for that. I know we committed to a certain dollar amount, and just wanted to be sure for upcoming budget that we're planning for now. Are there any changes to that?
So, Stephen, why don't you go ahead? Can you run down, just kind of talk quickly about that, the budget?
Sure. There. And I owe that to you. Part of it, obviously, there are going to be certain elements of the budget from this year that are carryover. ED salary, legal fees, the agreement that we have with HRPDC for for what I'd call overhead functions, insurance, audit, and some things like that. So I wanted to hear a part of this conversation today because as I briefed in the last meeting, we probably will have an asset. We budgeted $710,000 for the 100% design. CTC's bid was basically $315,000 for the product that we have to date. So I have enough money, I think, in the budget to either, depending on which construction and RFP route we go, enough money to either pay CTC to help us get the RFP out and develop a QA plan, or if we decided to go 100% design, I believe I have enough money for that. So I think we're okay for this year, but let me work on those numbers and I'll get it out to the board here next week. So there's two questions. There's an operation and maintenance budget that it was $1 million this year, but it may not be that much next year for the basic services. But of course, the procurement route we go will make a big decision.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
we've got a $300,000 asset that can be used to take us to the next level.
Okay. So you're going to get those out, that budget,
Yeah.
that information out to us next week.
I will.
Great question, Gina. Thank you for asking that. All right. Other questions? All right. And so we have a clear understanding, especially our executive director, of where we're going next and what we're going to be doing over the next month till we have our January meeting. In the meantime, anything else on this topic before we move on just to the new business or old business? All righty. Then moving on to old and new business. Andrea, you wanted to you want to go ahead and revisit that what you just said?
Sure. I just wanted to get an update on the status of the website. And
Sure. So I met with SIR and John and Colden yesterday, and we talked about a couple of options because I think that there was two schools of thought about how quickly we moved out with the website. One, we want to get something out there so people understand what we're doing and we tell our story. But two, depending on the operations strategy that we take, the marketing plan would look totally different and the website would look totally different. So one of the options that I'll address for feedback with John was that we could go ahead and do a soft launch of the website in January. For instance, they've recommended we pick a generic URL like www.hamptonroads.network. If we pick something like that, it future-proofs the authority branding, but it provides us with some flexibility and alignment if we change the name of the authority as we move forward. I mean, right now we're SNA and we're 5 cities, but eventually there'll be 17. So the soft rollout would allow us basically in a neater format to present the PowerPoint that we have, and it'll start to answer questions without getting into the detail of a full marketing plan because we just don't know what that'll look like. So that would be one option, is that we could do a soft launch in January.
Okay.
I'd like to do that and recognize this as an iterative approach, and it's not completely perfect. We don't have a logo, etc. But again, right, to your point, we don't know what we're branding because we don't know if we're going with 1, 3 or a hybrid of the two. But I do think having a vehicle to point people to without necessarily making a big marketing splash would be my recommendation.
And I think that's and if, with your permission, I'm going to get John to pick up the www.hamptonroads.network. It's transformational, it's future-proof, so it also gets that net and com thing out of there. It makes it easier to understand, and it can carry over no matter how we name this, the organization.
Directed if we once it's we can redirect once. The name is I agree. It's something that just needs to be a placeholder for right now, but it's fine for that. So
Yeah, we're not gonna,
I
we're gonna take the 757 logo off, all that kind of stuff I mean, because we don't have a brand yet, but it'll be more generic.
While we're on that topic, and I know that this is, again, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but I just want to put it out there for a thought piece, is that I know all of our cities have different, ideas of what we're naming our individual rings or what we have already named our individual rings. I will throw out that Chesapeake is very interested in making sure we have alignment with whatever we name the regional ring. We've kind of sort of fallen on Chesapeake Connects because we, kind of felt like we looked at bridge, we looked at, bridging the span, we looked at span, we looked at a lot of different options, but that's one that we seem to be kind of gravitating to, at least temporarily. But just for your awareness is that, I think it is really helpful and, solidifies and cements that regional approach. But it's just what I'm telling you, Chesapeake's looking at. Certainly, I recognize every city has their own ideas of what they're doing. So
Susan, let me just share with you. I think, wasn't ours Norfolk Connect?
Is yours Norfolk Connect?
Yeah, but then somebody shortened it to Norfolk Con. Don't do that.
Oh, that was painful. I remember that.
Don't do that.
Yeah,
that was
one
painful.
that, unless you're in the Navy, conning doesn't have a good connotation. So unless you're conning a ship, it's not a good idea. So
I can't see if Fraser's smiling, but that one was hopefully was forgotten, but I see it wasn't. Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to shorten it.
So let me do
right.
this. Let me talk to John and Bob Crum, and then I'll get back with Chair and the Vice Chair about some potential, just offered up Hampton Roads Network. It could be anything, but I like the connects. I mean, and Bob, that might be one of them. I think one of them is close to something, Hampton Roads Connects or 757 Connects.
Rosemary.
I don't think you should use 757 because I think we're going to be getting another area code as well. So I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I said, it's just, I know it's only temporary, but I threw it out there. So yes, I agree with the soft launch in January. I don't know if any of the other board members have opinions on that, but I definitely think, we want to get something going on this. So, and I know I get questions about it all the time. So even just from an awareness perspective, it's great to have that information out there. So, all right. Any other old or new business? Anecdotes, short stories? No. I see. Move it along. We've got a half hour early. So, all right. Well, with that said, I want to thank everybody on this call. What a productive call this has been. And especially thank you to our partners, CTC, Joanne, Matt. We really do appreciate the direction and the help that you've provided and all the benefit of your incredible expertise and experience in this arena. So just thank you so much to you.
Thank you. We are really proud to be part of your team.
Indeed. Thank you.
Hey, Susan, do we have a date for January yet?
I believe we are working on that, right, Stephen?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody, since we probably will not be meeting until January, please have a wonderful holiday and a very happy new year.
Yeah, 2020 done us over.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Good job. Bye.
Good job.
Thank you.